sorrows and all of that. So what I'm going to read from today is from pages 237 and 238 from the discourses. So Baba says, to acquire control over thoughts is to become fully conscious of what they are. I'm going to read that sentence again. To acquire control over thoughts is to become fully conscious of what they are. They have to be attended to before they are controlled. And that's what we're doing here. We're finding out what those stressful thoughts are, and we are attending to them very meticulously. And then he goes on to say, in ordinary introspection, it is seldom possible for the beginner to devote adequate attention to all the shadowy thoughts that pass through the mind. It is helpful, therefore, for the aspirant occasionally to write down all of his thoughts as they come, and then to inspect them carefully at leisure. This process is different from writing planned essays. Thoughts are allowed to arise without any direction or restraint, so that even repressed elements from the subconscious mind have access to the conscious mind. So I'd love to hear anybody who has anything they'd like to share from listening to that. And I'm going to share my own thought, but you can be thinking about if there's anything you'd like to say. What I've really become aware of lately is that we're working on desires. You know, Baba says, and the Buddha said, the cause of suffering is desire, and the cure for suffering is to become detached. And so my thought is that I was tending to think of desires as, you know, fame and fortune, like grandiose desires. And I would say that most of us don't have those kind of grandiose desires. But what we're working on here, these are desires. You know, all the things we've been working on the last few weeks, they hurt me with their criticism. I want them to stop criticizing me. They should realize their criticism hurts me. Do you see how these are all desires that we have? We want so many things, and it's like, I think Darwin talks about the wanting machine. And so it's just becoming even more clear to me how the mind is just a wanting machine, pumping out desires, you know. I want this, I want that. And so I just wanted to bring that up because if you're like me, you probably think, oh, I really don't have desires. But if we really think about it, we have tons of desires, even though they seem very unimportant and small. Or maybe they seem important at the time, of course. But does anybody have any awarenesses or observations that they'd like to share about that? Robin?
Well, I've thought a lot about any time I don't like how something's happening, it's because of my desires. I'd rather have it be some other way. But what you were saying about writing down your thoughts, two thoughts about that is they come too fast to write them down for one thing, and they shoot all over the place. But also, so that's like just doing like, what do you call it, where you just, I can't think of the word of just whatever comes up.
I know what you mean.
Stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness, yeah. And I'm not sure that that's exactly what Baba's talking about. He says, that was Baba's words. He says, occasionally write down all your thoughts as they come and then inspect them carefully. And of course, the work pinpoints writing down our stressful thoughts. I mean, in my experience, the happy thoughts don't really need to be examined. We just enjoy them. But when we notice, oh, I just noticed I'm believing that he should be paying more attention to me, or he should be kinder to me, or, you know, those ordinary daily thoughts that we have. Those are the thoughts that we're writing down in this inquiry process and inspecting them at our leisure, like Baba suggests.
And anytime there's a should in it, there's a desire behind it for it to be different, right?
anytime there's a want, a should, and then of course the umbrella statement, which we've been working on for a few weeks, they hurt me with their criticism because our desire is to have our projected world give us what we want. And Baba wants us to recognize that happiness is our natural state and it resides within us. And the more we can wean ourselves away from this habit that our mind has developed over, God, eons, of looking for fulfillment outside of ourself, that's what we're working on. And you know, that is what Baba says, desirelessness, that's the causeless happiness, then we get to enjoy that. And you know, what can I say? It's a journey, and it's a long journey for most of us. And I just feel personally so grateful that I have this very systematic, reliable process to identify what I'm thinking and believing that's causing my suffering. And I really can't say that enough, because when you internalize it, it will become automatic. So anyway, and welcome to Damien. Nice to see you. Hi. So we were just reading from page 237 and 238 in the discourses, just about Baba's saying, write down your thoughts and inspect them. And you know, that's another way that we can, he says that even repressed elements from the subconscious mind have access to the conscious mind when we do this, as like Robin was saying, with this kind of stream of consciousness. And I think the more we become aware of our thoughts, the easier it is to identify those thoughts that are actually the repetitive, stressful beliefs. So does anybody have anything they want to share before we jump in?
Well, you know, being quarantined for almost 3 months now by myself, I just wanted to be over.
Yes, yes. And I really feel for you, Tina. My heart just goes out to you completely, you know, because I live in a very rural area, and so, you know, it's different. I can get out and walk and all that stuff, but I really believe that Baba is stirring all this up so that we can get rid of even more sanskaras, and there is an end to it, and hopefully the end is coming sooner than later. And you know, you're kind of at ground zero in New York City, so I know I speak for all of us that our hearts are with you.
Thank you. It's getting a lot better here. I mean,
oh good,
is going down. A lot of other places are going up because they're not social distancing and following the guidelines.
Yeah. And, you know, my thought is that I'm going to keep doing the inquiry circles, even though everything opens up. And if people want to come, we can just continue on with it. I know it helps me to just stay in it.
Yeah,
So,
Angela's going to do a lot of her programs, and she's going to be adding a movie night too.
Who? Oh, Angela. Nice. Well, I think it's one of the positive outcomes of this situation is that we're taking more advantage of technology in such a positive way of connecting.
It's very wonderful. Made so many wonderful new friends, and connected with my old friends in Myrtle Beach. And
that's beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah. I'm an extrovert. I don't like being alone.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I envy introverts at times like this.
Yes. Okay, so today I'm going to just tell you what we're working on, because I realized a few weeks ago that I had to develop the generic statement so that we could all work on the same thing. So when you look at, you don't need to put up the Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet, Diantha, but I'm just going to read statement 4. We've done statements 1, 2, and 3, you know, the umbrella statement, the wants, and the advice we would give. And this week we're going to work on what do we need in order to be happy in this situation. And the overarching situation is that someone hurt me with their criticism. So you can still keep that person in mind as we'll probably complete the worksheet today, and then we'll start on something else. Baba will inspire me to know what would be the next thing to work on. So, and I spoke briefly last week about what we need in order to be happy is so unique for every person. And so the work is meditation, and it's really important to just go inside your own heart and notice what really makes my heart sing, what really makes me happy. And I want you to be able to apply that to this situation, where somebody hurt you with their criticism. So this week, my statement is, I need them, he or she, to recognize who I really am. And it could be I need them to recognize me, but I think we'll just go with, I need them to recognize who I really am. And this is after we've done the work on, they hurt me with their criticism. I want them to stop criticizing me. They should realize their criticism hurts me. And now we're going to work on, I need them to recognize who I really am. So we're going to focus on the positive. We want that person to see positive aspects in us, and we're feeling like they're not doing that when they're criticizing us. Okay. And before we start that, I'm going to read you a few excerpts from this Catching the Thread, Sufism, Dream Work, and Jungian Psychology that I've read from before. Because I feel like, as I've told you, the work really does reflect Jungian psychology in that we're identifying, we're projecting the world. Baba says we have to project the world in order to become conscious. And that's what Jungian psychology tells us too. And that's how Baba says, by making the unconscious conscious is how we realize God. So dreams are a part of our subconscious and unconscious. And the reason I'm going to read this excerpt to you is because it spoke to me very personally. This Llewellyn von Lee was describing the dream of a friend of his, and the dream started out where it was like a crocodile, and with the teeth like a monster, and then it metamorphosed into it was like the grates on the front of a Volvo, and then it actually metamorphosed into a cruel woman. This was a woman who had the dream. So what he says is, as the energies of the unconscious come closer to consciousness, they take on a more human guise. So our journey, he talks about it into this heart of darkness, which is our unconscious. It began for this woman with confronting her own personal cruelty, which the dream suggests she is now able to relate to and accept. And I'm going to read more about it, but the point I'm making is, when we can recognize those parts of ourselves that we really don't like, and for me it was cruelty. I was known for having a sharp tongue, even as a child, and I could cut people with my words. And then as I recognized that, as I became older and as I came to Baba and as I did the work, I really worked on turning cruelty into kindness. So it's like there's all this raw energy that I was using with my sharp tongue to cut people. And that same energy can be used in kindness to support people. And we all have our shadow. So see if you can just recognize within yourself, what would be a big shadow aspect of your own being that you can bring into the light that's going to turn into a big plus. For example, if it's anger actually turns into tolerance and patience. And that's something I really didn't have. I was not a patient person, and I've become more patient because I've worked really hard at it. So all of these negatives that we naturally acquire as we go through evolution and through the animal kingdom, we actually need to face them. And, you know, Jung was well known for saying that these, you know, we don't come into the light by just meditating on figures of light. We come into the light by bringing our shadow into the light. That's what really brings us closer to Baba and to consciousness. So he goes on to say, we can only become what we are in the most natural core of our being. And just as a flower opens its petals toward the sun, so does the seeker open her heart to the beloved. But for our dreamer, the doorway to the limitless world of the self is the recognition of her own cruelty. It may appear paradoxical that our own darkness is the beginning of spiritual life, but this is what is meant in the Psalms by the stone which the builders refused to become the headstone of the corner. Our own shadow has immense transformative potential, but is overlooked and disregarded by those who cannot humbly and sincerely accept their own nature. Spiritual and psychological work means taking a light into the darkness of oneself and loving and accepting what is found there. And that's what we've been talking about. We really have to embrace our shadow, and we have to nurture it and have compassion for it. And that's how it gets transformed and integrated. And that's how we become more whole and non-dual, and therefore able to have compassion and empathy for everyone. So he says, most simple and yet most difficult, work upon the shadow lays the foundation for all further processes of inner transformation. Let's see. So we'll stop there. There's lots more, but I think we'll save it for another time. So if you weren't here in the beginning, please find someone whom you believe they hurt you with their criticism. And then we're going to statement 4 of the Judge Your Neighbor Worksheet today. And I want you to contemplate for a moment, in order for you to be happy in this situation, what do you need them to think, say, feel, or do? And then you're going to say, I need them to recognize who I really am. But I want you to really get clear about your own personal situation, about what you need also. And part of that is that they recognize who you really are. What do you want them to recognize about you when they're criticizing you? This is going to be what you need in order to be happy. Okay? So we're going to begin the inquiry now, and everybody can unmute themselves. And what we do is I ask you the question, and it's just a yes or a no for the first 2 questions. And then when we come to question 3, Diantha will post the sub-questions, because that supports us in answering question 3. Okay, and then we'll work on the turnarounds together too. So everybody take a few gentle breaths and just relax. This is all about allowing your inner wisdom to rise up and the answers to rise up within you. And we are so fortunate to know that Baba lives in our hearts, and his is that voice of our heart and that voice of intuition. And it's just waiting for us to listen to it. So just relax and take a few breaths. And everybody has your situation that you're focused on. Okay. So, is it true that you need them to recognize who you really are? And when you're ready, just unmute yourself and it's just a yes or a no.
No.
Yes.
No.
Is it true that you need them to recognize who you really are?
Yes.
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 No.
Yeah, it has to be honest. I said yes because I thought of a situation and I realized I'm not quite ready to let that one go. So now, for those of us who said yes, I want you to ponder for a full 60 seconds. Can you absolutely know that it's true, that you need them to recognize who you really are? And just ponder that for a full minute before you respond. Can you absolutely know that it's true? No.
No.
Mm,
No.
Can you absolutely know that it's true, that you need them to recognize who you really are? And you can't do it wrong. There's no wrong answer. And it's just a yes or a no. Has everybody found their answer? Does anybody need more time? Okay, we're going to move on now to question 3. So, Diantha, you can post the sub-questions for question 3. How do you react? What happens when you believe the thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? And so we look at that first sub-question. These are all ways to find out how you react. And it keeps us from going into our stories, which the interpreter mind is always wanting to do. So what emotions do you feel when you're believing that thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? What emotions do you feel?
I felt frustration
Frustration. Okay, great.
and also guilt because I think I told you about that situation where I was trying to explain Baba to someone and what he did, and I said I didn't meditate, and he said that I was oppositional, and I felt like I'm dragging Baba down with me.
Okay, so guilt, frustration.
Yeah.
And Tina, where do you feel that in your body? Where do you feel the guilt? See if you can locate it in your body. And everybody do this with the emotions you're feeling. Where do you feel it in your body? Did you respond, Tina?
I said in my chest.
In your chest, okay. Yeah, and I felt pain. I felt pain in my chest too. Anybody else locate an emotion in their body where you feel the sensation? So what we're going to do now, and Tina, you and I are going into our chest, into our heart area. We're going to witness. Remember, the witness is who we really are. The soul remains aloof to all the emotions and thoughts and sensations. Our soul is always aloof. And so We're going to go in the witness mode, and this requires a discipline of the mind to just notice that sensation, that emotion, wherever you find it in your body. And neuroscientists have discovered that something will shift within 60 to 90 seconds. So you're going to put your full attention as the objective observer on the sensations and emotions that you're feeling right now. When you're believing the thought that you need them to recognize who you really are. So we're going to do that now for a minute and a half. Okay, so I'm going to share what I noticed. I was working on my son, and he just said something last night which kind of triggered me. And what I noticed as I sat with that hurt in my heart was I noticed I left myself because I was in his business, wanting his approval, I think. I mean, that's the closest I can come to it. And I'm wanting him to recognize who I really am. And I noticed how bereft my heart was because I left myself. So does anybody else have anything to share of what they noticed? And don't forget to unmute yourself if you're willing to share. Okay, it's a quiet day. It's a quiet day in the neighborhood. That's okay. That's okay. Hopefully everybody who wants to share is able to. So I need them to recognize who I really am. So another sub-question is, do any images arise when you're believing that thought? And these could be images, maybe it's often valuable to notice the earliest memory you had when you had the thought that you needed someone to recognize who you really are. So just close your eyes and see if any images or memories arise. Your earliest memory, maybe, when you had that thought. For me, I'm noticing that I was the third of 4 children, and I always wanted my parents' attention. And I remember trying to do tricks on my bars and swings and trying to do really cool things. And I remember saying, look at me, and never feeling like I was seen, you know, the way I wanted to be seen. I just wanted attention. So that was the image that arose for me, maybe my earliest memory when I first had that thought. You know, I need them to recognize who I really am. You know, that I'm unique and special, and I'm not just the number 3 daughter. I'm unique. Anybody else have anything that they could share that just supports all of us in realizing the universality of these situations?
I remember when my second grade teacher made me confess to spilling a can of green paint, and I didn't spill it. But
Wow.
stand in front of the class and confess to it. And, you know, that this was after all day of standing in the corner. And, you know, then she praised me for telling the truth when actually was lying.
Oh dear. Yeah, that's a pretty painful experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just notice if there's still some energy on those early childhood memories, then you can separately take those to inquiry. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share before we go on to the next sub-question?
I've had a similar experience that has been a repeated thing in my career as a musician. And I think of one in particular thing where you notice that a band leader is somewhat abusive to somebody working with you. And and there's one guy in particular who is actually kind of a friend of mine. And I know that those people will eventually get to you. You know, it could go for a while. So anyway, it got to a point with this one person that I really was very angry. And I knew that it was just the way he was built and it was his pattern and he kind of just couldn't help his thing, but it would still get to me. So it was like, and I still to this day, to this minute, you know, just put it over to the side, even though I feel like I've processed it so many times. But the amount of anger that I feel towards this guy at times, it's in there, very strong.
So you still work with him, is that right?
No, he's up in New York and I haven't worked with him a long time.
Oh,
and
I see.
I didn't continue to put myself in the situation. I didn't accept work after a while that he was doing. But I know he feels bad about it too, because I was very confrontational, let him know right away when he was being abusive to other people. So when he got to me, I wasn't passive aggressive about it. I definitely was very confrontational. But anyway, it still really would bother me because you're always people pleasing as being a sideman like me. And you're working with all these guys and
Okay, stop for a minute. I want to say,
yeah.
You just said for a guy like me, you know, it's like part of, what did you call yourself? A side man?
Yeah.
I would question the thought, a side man has to people please.
No, you're absolutely right, believe me. Oh yeah.
No, but it's good to catch these things because these words come out of our mouth and those are like,
yep.
Those are like hidden beliefs, and that's my job as a facilitator to give back to you. That's something to just question, whether you do it on paper or just in your mind. You're believing that as a sideman, you have to people please, and I would really question that thought.
Maybe it's a bad choice of words, but you have to make them want to call you again. So you have to, you know, you have to contract the work, you have to get callbacks.
So it's not a really stressful situation.
Yeah, but you know, you make a good point because sometimes being a people pleaser that I work at, not being a people pleaser.
Yes.
I realize that when you are really honest about it, often they'll call you just as much. It doesn't, doing that people pleaser thing doesn't necessarily help you in your career as a musician. But it definitely is an aspect of my personality that,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it could help you in your career as a
Yeah.
musician, but I would question whether people pleasing helps you in your spiritual path,
well, it's definitely,
and there's a way to be honest and kind,
yep,
and all of us have to be diplomatic in our relationships, and particularly in professional relationships, but in all relationships there's so much value in diplomacy. And Bob has really helped me with understanding how to be kind and still be honest. And it sometimes is a razor's edge to just know what to not say. But I mean, Bob is such the master of that, because he has spoken about, just, you don't have to say everything, which I used to do that, believe me. I used to spout off.
that's right, that's true. But I also find that it's 1 in 30 people, let's say, or whatever, that,
Yeah.
I could put up with lots of things and just realize, okay, that's them, this is me.
Yeah.
That's just the way they're being, not, I don't even really care half the time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, certain people, they just, they go right through me, man. And I, much less than when I was younger, and much less every day, really. But this was that one particular guy. So I'm glad that I picked him, because all the anger came back. And he just made a post on Facebook today about some gig I did with him. And it was so funny, because I really got very angry and very hurt. I took it all personally.
But did he make a positive post?
Oh yes, very, very positive.
Yeah. Well, we talked about anger. I think we talked about anger last week, and Baba has a lot to say about anger.
Yeah.
And the thing that's so amazing is, so anger turns into patience and tolerance when we learn to control it.
Yeah.
And still feel it, because we're not supposed to be stones. We are supposed to feel it. But it really is the most miraculous thing to learn to control the anger. And, it really makes you a kind of a hero. And it makes life a lot better. So, and we don't have to say everything to that person who triggered the anger. Sometimes we have to say, objective truths.
Yeah.
But, so
what used to happen to me, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but what used to happen, my experience was, I would just take it and not say anything, and be very upset about it, and suffer, for days and weeks and whatever. I wasn't assertive enough, and then eventually I learned to be assertive without the anger. But this particular guy, I was assertive with anger, and he was being abusive, and it really just was beyond me. I wasn't exactly cool about it, but at least I stood up, I feel. But definitely, you're so right that getting past all that and dealing with it with love and a kind way.
It's not me, it's Baba. I mean, I'm more the opposite personality. I never was passive about anything, I just say what I thought. So we all get to refine ourselves and get those edges rubbed off, whether we're too passive or we're too aggressive. And it's just always a work in progress. And as we've talked about throughout all of our sessions, it's so important to just keep being kind to ourselves, because we are going to fail. It's just part of the deal. I always say 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So we're still moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
So So does anybody else have anything to say about images that arose when you were believing the thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? Anything else before we move on? Okay. So now I want you to notice, how do you treat them when you're believing that thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? How do you treat them, even if only in your mind? Boy, what comes up for me instantly in this situation from last night with my son is that, oh, I'm treating him like he knows more about me than I do. It's like for some reason, I just left myself. I mean, I have a very good relationship with my son, but it's still, deep and karmic. And so something got triggered where I doubted myself. So I notice I treat him like he's the person who knows better than me. So does anybody else have something to share? What do you notice about how you treat that person when you're believing the thought that I need them to recognize who I really am?
Yeah, I think like for me with the guy who was kind of discounting Bob and because I said I didn't meditate. It didn't work for me. And
yes, good to notice.
So I felt like, what was the question again?
So I want you to, it's the sub-question, how do you treat that person when you're believing the thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? How do you treat them, even if only in your mind?
I kept trying to find a way to convey it to him. I became kind of tongue-tied. I was stammering.
Okay, so my job is to really hone in, because those are all good pointers. You become tongue-tied. How do you treat him?
Like he was saying like how great meditation was for him. And so I felt like he was more enlightened than me because it's
Bingo. So it's not easy to notice how you treat people. We always tell stories and kind of dance around it. It's just the way the mind works. So just like I thought my son knew more than me, Tina thought this guy was more enlightened than her. Can everybody find that? How when you leave yourself, you give. You just believe that they're better than you, they know more than you, they're the authority on the subject, you know.
He said that he's getting into these very altered states from meditating. He's, just connecting.
Oh, those altered states, they're the best.
It's like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah, oh my goodness. I mean, I have to say, one of the things I love so much about Baba is how natural we get to be in our life, because I was in an intentional community for 20 years and it was pretty natural, but there was a lot of rituals and so on and so forth. And I really appreciate the naturalness that Baba really creates for us in our path with him. So could everybody find how they treated that person when they were believing they needed them to recognize who I really am? I just felt how I left myself. We cannot leave ourselves because remember, Baba lives in our heart. And we're leaving Baba really when we leave ourselves. Does that make sense? It's kind of a nice way to experience it. I'm just going to stay here and nurture Baba in my heart. And then the next sub-question is, how do you treat yourself when you believe the thought, I need them to recognize who I really am? So concomitantly to believing that they know, they're the authority, they know more than I do, how are we treating ourselves when we're believing that thought? Can you find it? How am I treating myself?
It's like, what's wrong with me? I'm kind of beating.
Wow, you took the words right out of my mouth. There's something wrong with me. That's how I'm treating myself.
Shut myself down.
Yes, yes. And just really, we all, if we can just get so clear about how we leave ourselves so often and what that does to our heart and our, ability to honor the integrity of our path with Baba, then I think it's going to be easier for us to stay with ourselves. And I think that also helps us not take the criticism so seriously.
Mm.
It's just, the mind criticizes. It's what it does. The mind judges all day long. Our job is to just learn to not believe those judgments. And someday, when we're God realized, we'll be beyond all of that. But for now, let's just watch how the mind is wearing itself out with its judgments and just go to that place of love and care for ourselves and for others. Okay? Did anybody else have any observation about how they treat themselves when they're believing the thought that I need them to recognize who I really am? Okay, let's go on then. Let's go on to, what do you fail to see when you're believing the thought that I need them to recognize who I really am? What do you fail to see when you're believing that thought? Just ponder that for a moment. Or let's back up for a minute and say, what are you unable to do? What are you unable to do when you're believing the thought that you need them to recognize who you really are?
I'm unable to keep my center. It's like I just give over my power to them.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm unable to take care of myself. And I'm also unable to just question on the spot. When I get triggered and I'm thinking that I'm unworthy or there's something wrong with me, I'm unable to just inquire into that belief, And I've done a lot of inquiry on there's something wrong with me. We encourage not doing the work on yourself at first, but then after time, when you're not going to beat yourself up too much. What I found in inquiring into there's something wrong with me is that it can be a positive thing. Oh, there's something wrong with me. That's, it's kind of like where the wound is where the light comes through. And I can feel compassion for other people's suffering because I know my own woundedness. So yay, there's something wrong with me. Until I'm completely God realized, can I just be a compassionate fellow traveler with my, my beloved friends? Anybody else? What are you unable to do when you're believing that thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? So what else comes up for me is I'm unable to just keep marching forward in my life. It's like I just lose that momentum of just marching forward, in Baba's love and just being fearless. So let's go on to the last sub-question. What do you fail to see when you're believing the thought, I need them to recognize who I really am? What do we fail to see when we're believing that thought? Okay, what comes up for me? I was failing to see in that moment that my beloved son is a mirror to show me where my work is. He's my sweet projection who still shows me, that I just need to get the dust off the mirror of my own mind and notice that everything is exactly as it needs to be. And I don't have to dwell in it. Would anybody else like to share before we go on to question 4?
Well, in my situation, with the guy who thought I was, oppositional because I didn't meditate. What did I fail to see? I did say, well, glad it works for you, or, but when I believe the thought, I failed to see that everybody's different and people have different opinions about things, and
Yes.
less than.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's so important. Everybody's different. We all have different sanskaras. It's like we just are all unique little bundles of sanskaras, and then we are one soul when all is said and done. But we've got all these sanskaras that kind of make us believe the illusion that we're separate. And I like this last sub-question because it really helps us find question 4. Who would you be without the thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? And so what Tina said is also who you are without the thought. I'm someone who recognizes that we're all different. Can you feel how expansive that is? It just feels like, fresh air.
But even though I said that to him, I was shaken up
Yeah.
by the whole conversation.
Yeah.
Like I failed Baba. I dragged his name in the dust.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's just a thought, and no thought is true. And we just have to know that. This is the most important thing that the work teaches us, is to learn to disidentify from our thoughts. The most horrible thought we can think isn't even reality. Reality is so far beyond the mind and its thoughts, okay? Baba is supreme knowledge, power, and bliss, and nothing we do is going to drag him through the mud. And, and so just love yourself through that stressful thought. So without the thought, everybody's different. We're all doing the best we can. Anybody else have any thought to share on who you are? Who are you without the thought that you need them to recognize who you really are? Okay.
You're a lot happier.
Yes, we're a lot happier. It's with the thought we suffer. Without the thought, we feel spaciousness.
Yeah.
And equanimity. And there's like for me, one of my most healing practices is to be out in nature. That's what helps the thoughts just really slow down. And everybody just find what works for you. Sometimes it's just meditating on Baba's beautiful face. I go through phases where different images of Baba just nourish me incredibly. And it's so much fun to see what reflection, he's going to give back. So.
He definitely changes it up, and you can see
Yeah. That's
all
so
sorts
true.
of reactions to you, and the glitter in his eyes and
I know.
his facial expressions. Does anybody else here, this is a little sidetracked, you're focusing on Baba's picture, and sometimes just staring at it, all of a sudden it will change at rapid speed, and it can just go on as long as I want to just stay there, where the picture's just moving all over the place.
Yeah. Who knows what can happen? I think it's probably different for all of us. when I first came to Baba and I ordered his books and I saw his picture, he started changing rapidly. And I had been into Kali, you know, the Hindu goddess Kali, and he was
Yeah.
turning into Kali, and then he would turn back into Baba, and then he'd turn into Kali. But, you
Yeah.
know, it's like, those are my projections. For whatever reason, I needed to see that, oh, he is that. And then just this week, so my husband and I, my husband's not a Baba lover, but we chant in the morning together. We chant to Krishna and Ram and Tara, and, you know, and so this week we've been chanting to Tara, and we have a beautiful statue of Tara in our living room.
Mm.
And what I was noticing this week was that after the chanting was done and he went off to his cave to meditate, Tara would just be bringing all this light to me, beautiful light, just inundating golden light in the room. And this week she turned into Baba. And I started crying because, you know, it's like, I know Baba is everything, but still, you know, there's that part of me that's like, oh, my husband's not a Baba lover, you know, and so I have to make it work, blah, blah, blah. But and then now I will never look at Tara and forget that she's Baba. And it was, you know, did somebody say something?
I just wanted to know who's Tara.
Well, she's the goddess of compassion in Buddhism.
Oh,
And there's many emanations of her. There's the green Tara and the white Tara. She's known for healing, and she's known as the Savioress. And I was, you know, just having this awareness of, you know, like Mara, and how in this Advent, you know, she was Baba's very breath. Without her, he couldn't live. And there's always the feminine counterpart in creation who is like, she's like a nexus. I experienced that female creation as serving Baba and serving humanity. And I don't know, it was such a gift to me that she turned into Baba. I mean, I can still see his face when I look at
that's
her.
beautiful.
Yeah, so everything is Baba, and we all make our journey home to Baba work, because each of us has our unique set of challenges, you know. I mean, I'm sure we could all list them out. It's just, and it's perfectly set up for each of us to return home. Like, there are no mistakes. Because I used to think, oh gosh, if my husband was a Baba lover, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? I realized, no, this is my journey. This is my path. He's a wonderful human being. He's absolute kindness and compassion and patience. And so, you know, gee whiz, no problems. So we're gonna, what?
I liked how in the beginning you tied all of this into giving up desires, and how our desires are what make us suffer. And that's what Meher Baba says. So if you give up needing that person to see you as you really are, in a way you're giving up the desire, that desire to.
Yes, it's so true. It's so true. Reality is much kinder than any of us think. We keep thinking, oh, if this would change, or if this would change. But, you know, it's a setup. It's a perfect setup.
Like, something matters so much to us. It's amazing how like ridiculous I can be. I mean, in my mind, yeah, absolutely. So
yeah, and in the work, Byron Katie says the worst things that happen to us are the best things. And I have found that to be true. It's like they just help us wake up. For some reason, we just don't want to wake up. And sometimes we just have to have a prod. So Diantha, now you can put up the turnaround file. And this is going to be, we're going to work on the turnarounds for our needs. So the statement is, I need them to recognize who I really am And then we're going to find 3 genuine specific examples for each of the turnarounds below that could be as true or truer than the original statement. And the reason we do this is because it just opens our mind up. Remember, we're opening new neural pathways in our brain, and that's why these examples are difficult to find. But the more we do it, the more open our mind becomes. There's actually, in the right hemisphere, there's a more open mind. And so neuroscientists have studied and found that through this specific work of Byron Katie, they've tracked it, that it's opening new neural pathways from the left to the right hemisphere. So the turnaround to the self is, I need me to recognize who I really am. And I can tell you from all these years of doing the work, the turnaround to the self is the golden key to coming home to ourselves. If I can just recognize who I really am, I'm not even going to have a need for somebody else to recognize who I really am. So I want each of us to find in our particular situation examples, and please share a few, because honestly, everybody who shares is helping all of us to see how we really are just one mind. It's all one big old mind sharing. I need me to recognize who I really am. So in my situation with my son, he's a Vedic astrologer, and he was telling my husband last night some really cool and interesting things about his astrology. And so I asked Victor, I said, well, tell me about mine. What's happening with mine? And he's like, Mom, you just live in this subjective world, you know, there's nothing for me to tell you. And so I felt hurt, you know, I felt criticized. But when I do this turnaround to myself, I need me to recognize who I really am. I could actually just recognize that, well, yeah, that's actually what I'm working on. I want to live more out of my inner subjective world. I'm trying to withdraw all my projections from this outer world and recognize that this is a dream I'm waking up from. So I'm not going to feel hurt and criticized when he said, you know, I just live in my subjective world. So that would be an example of, I need me to recognize who I am. I'm someone who's striving to withdraw my projections and integrate into my own being all of those beliefs I have about who that is out there, who that son of mine who's actually my sweet dream, you know, criticizing me. So does anybody else have an example? I need me to recognize who I really am.
Well, I'll go back to the oppositional guy, the guy who said I was oppositional.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I am oppositional just because I have problems meditating. But
Yes.
you know, I can be oppositional sometimes if someone tries to convert me to their way of thinking. But I don't think that's my essence, is to just be.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful example. And it reminds me of that one where the Byron Katie was working with prisoners in a lockdown facility, and the guy is criticizing her appearance. And, you know, she just enjoyed it, but she didn't believe any of it. She never changed anything. She didn't care. You know, and it's like, yeah, if the guy thinks you're oppositional, that's okay, but you know you're not. And that's enough. I need me to recognize who I really am.
Right.
Can anybody else share an example? This is so important, because we withdraw our projections. We don't have, nobody out there can give us what we have to give ourselves. And of course, I always include Baba in that, because Baba lives in our heart. Is there one brave soul out there who can share one example? One example.
I will, I guess.
Oh, thank you, dear.
So my husband, like, he wants me to be more fancy, more feminine and fancy.
Okay.
And I feel bad, when he, whatever way he conveys that to me, but it's just not me. I've sort of tried to be like that. It's not me. And, I feel bad, like, for him and for me that I'm disappointing him or whatever. But ultimately, I like my values and the way that I can just be myself. And if it doesn't happen to fit with what he seems to want, then
Yeah.
I just have to feel like I'm enough and that it's okay to be me. And if he doesn't like it, oh well.
Thank you so much. I think that's such a beautiful example. And I just have a question, Robin. Have you ever been able to just tell him, I'd really like to be able to do that, but it's just not me?
I have told him, but not,
Good.
yeah, at times I have told him that.
I mean, it's
And
just,
he says, well, and I know that's all superficial stuff, like he doesn't really care about it, but he likes to get me going, and he can push my buttons real easy sometimes.
yeah. Yeah, we really have to be true to who we are. I know that. I mean, I know I have a similar situation where my husband wanted me to dress in a different way. And it's just not who I am. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. So,
I remember as a teenager, like, I had one friend who was like a hood, and so I had to wear black clothes and different makeup. And I tried that, and I tried a couple other things. None of those costumes or roles or whatever worked for me. I just thought, well, I'm just stuck with who I am. And it didn't seem
or not, don't say you're
positive.
stuck. I just get to be who I really am.
Well, at the time, but I didn't have very good self-esteem, so it felt like
But now you can just embrace,
I'm getting there. Slowly.
Yeah.
I'm getting there.
yeah. It's like, can I just love myself? Katie always says, you're the one you've been waiting for, She says the real marriage is to yourself. And I always add Baba into the mix because it's so much richer to have beloved Baba in our life. And the true marriage is to our inner self. It's that uniting of our inner masculine and feminine, which is so important because we're so used to just going out of our own business, trying to please other people or look the way they want us to look or whatever. And we really need to be true to ourselves. So let's move on to the turnaround to the other. I need me to recognize who they really are. So consider this, if we're going to believe that we need them to recognize who we are, I need me to recognize who they really are. And see if you can share an example that honestly, every example benefits all of us. I cannot emphasize that enough.
It just feels huge to me because there are a lot of things that I don't like about some of his choices or whatever. And to try to accept him the way he is and not, wish that he was different is big. It's just big.
It's big. And that's why Katie says, the people you live with are your gurus. They show you everything you don't want to see about yourself. And I swear to God, if I could not criticize my husband, even in my mind, I think I would be enlightened. So just notice that. He's your path to God realization. I mean, I'm telling you, the closer you get, the people you live with, they're going to show you everything you don't want to see about yourself. And we have spent so many embodiments wanting the people in our lives to change, and it's a losing game because we know how hard it is to change ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We just do our own work and stay in our own business and find out that paradise is here. We're living in paradise and we don't even know it. And so, yeah, we're all in the same boat and it just has a little bit of a different picture, So I need me to recognize who they really are. So in my situation with my son, I noticed that we have many times of absolute love and connection. And then there's that little kind of repartee time, you know, like like last night, my husband told him, he said, yeah, your mom was even talking like maybe she'll go back to India, because I haven't wanted to go back for years, but it just came to me recently that maybe it would happen, but I don't know. I just know if Baba wants me to go, I'll go. And my son says, no, you're not. You're not going back. And I'm like, oh, and why would that be? He says, because you're 70 years old and you're not that fit, and you could die, and I don't want you to go. And I just thought, oh, that's really sweet. He's just looking out for me. And of course, Baba's in charge. But I just took the love out of it. It was like, oh, that's really sweet. I mean, I could just take the part where he cares about me and leave
Yeah.
the rest out. Anybody else? Come on.
Well, the guy who said I was oppositional, he was a psychiatrist, and he was or a therapist or some kind of,
yeah.
and he approached everything very mentally.
Yeah. So you're recognizing that's a big part of who he is,
Mhm.
at least his persona, right?
I don't know him that well, but
No, but it sounds like when you recognize that he's a psychiatrist, you can sort of relate to the way he's talking.
right.
So anyway, the main point here is that we all see how as we find these examples in the turnarounds, we're kind of loosening up the grip of this interpreter mind that's always trying to create a dualistic story. It's very binary. It's black, white, yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong, and that's just not how life works, So let's go to the turnaround to the opposite. I don't need them to recognize who I really am. Why would we say that?
Well, in my case, I just met the guy. I didn't really know him, and I'd probably never see him again. So I don't know why it was so important to me that.
Yeah. Well, it was important because you needed to recognize who you really are. We leave ourselves, we want this illusion that we projected to give us positive feedback, but that's really not reality. Reality is withdrawing all the projections and just knowing that we are love, we are everything we need. And we don't have to keep looking for it outside of ourselves.
Right.
So for me, in this situation, I don't need my son to recognize who I really am, because I haven't even recognized who I really am. How can I expect him to recognize who I really am?
And I think when we realize that we don't need them to do it, then we can feel empowered and get into our own center and take over.
Yes, we're not leaving ourselves. We're not going into their business. And it's hard enough for me to recognize who I really am. Why would I need my son to do that? I mean, it's just silly. And then another common example that's very much a part of the core of the work is loving what is. Reality rules. If it's reality that they're not recognizing something about us that we want them to, we're trusting that everything is as it should be. And this is a really big lesson for us here. Learning to trust that life is actually, God's got it. God is in control of every little tiny piece of this life. And, whenever we think that God isn't in charge, then, we really suffer.
Yeah,
And
I was gonna say that last turnaround really brings me right to the thought that I don't need them to recognize who I really am. Meher Baba recognizes who I really am, with precision, right down to the last tiny sanskara. And he's put me in this situation because of that.
Oh, exquisite, exquisite. Thank you so much, Diantha. I love that. Oh, it gives me chills. Baba does recognize who we really are. And he knows our grief and our sorrows, and he has so much compassion for us. And, we just need to remember that, Okay, does anybody else have something they want to share before we have some closing thoughts? You know what we're going to do? Why don't you put up the Judge Your Neighbor worksheet, the whole worksheet, because we have time to do number 5 and 6, and then we'll have completely done one whole Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. And I think that would really serve us. I want you to see how number 5 and 6 are done because they're different. So all 1 through 4 we take through inquiry, through the 4 questions and turnarounds of the work. But when we get to number 5, it's the complaints. What do you think of them in this situation? Make a list. And you can see the example. Paul is a liar, arrogant, loud, dishonest, and unconscious. So I want you to just jot down right now just a couple of adjectives of what you think of this person that you're judging in this situation. Negative attributes. So I look at that and I'm like, yeah, I could see my son is arrogant. That, because he's always showing me my own arrogance, right? I wouldn't see that. I want everybody to find one because I want to take you through this. What we do with number 5 is I want you to find, I'm going to just use arrogant. And if that doesn't work for you, replace it with something else. I want you to find where that person is not arrogant. I want you to find where they're humble. So we look for the opposite quality. This is, again, learning to go beyond this dualistic mind. And it could be one tiny thing. It could be the smallest thing where you noticed for 1 millisecond that this person is humble. And I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself and just let me know when you found it. Can you find where this person is humble? I can find it.
Yeah, I can find it.
Great. Can just everybody just shout out when you found it.
Yes.
Yeah, I found it.
Okay, so if everybody's found it, the next thing we do with number 5 is, can I just find where I am that? For me, it's arrogant. Whatever negative thing you say about this person, can you just find it in yourself? And yes, it's not hard for me to find it.
Yeah,
So when you found it, just shout out.
Mm-hmm.
found it.
So this is how we work with number 5, and you go through each one and you find where they're the opposite quality. So in this situation with Paul is a liar, we would find where he doesn't lie, because nobody lies 24/7. And then loud, and even if it's only when he's sleeping, he's not loud. You have to find it. This is just a way to kind of pry that mind open. Can you find where he's honest? Sometimes he's honest. Can you find where he's conscious? It's just a way to notice how the mind works. It's always trying to make things black and white, and that's the cause of suffering. So that's how we treat number 5. So number 6, what is it about this person and situation that you don't ever want to experience again? So in our situation, with needing them to recognize who we are and noticing that their criticism hurts us, we could say, I don't ever want him to criticize me again. Okay, and there's many ways you can do number 6, but let's work with that one all together. And then scroll up a little bit. Diantha, can you scroll up on number 6? There we go. To scroll up all the way to the end of that page. Thank you. So now with number 6, question each of your statements using the 4 questions of the work below. I don't ever want him to criticize me again. So is it true? And we could say no. And the reason we would say that is because if he criticizes me again and I get triggered, it's showing me where my work is. I want to know what's left. What haven't I finished? And then we also can say, I am willing to be criticized by him again. And the reason we're willing to do that is because, again, I'm just trying to get this work done. I want to be free. And so I need to know what's still triggering me. And then we even say, I look forward to being criticized again. And I always tell my clients, I'm not there yet. I don't look forward to these things like being criticized again. I'm very honest about it because it's not true for me. But I am willing. Okay, so that's how we complete a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. And as I've told you before, I've found over time that when you completely, thoroughly do statement 1, the rest of the worksheet will just collapse. It's like it gets so crisp and clear that you don't even have to do all that other stuff. But in the meantime, as you're finding your way in the work, it's really helpful to break it down. Okay, so I have a few closing words from, well, let's see, I have it from, this is from Lord Maher, and it's on Mononash. So Baba says, the real goal of life is not death of the ego, but of the mind. Therefore, when Muhammad or Zoroaster or Jesus talked of being born once or dying once, they meant the death of the mind. Mind is born from the very beginning, even before the stone state. This birth is once, and also the death of the mind takes place only once. When the mind dies, the false ego is transformed into reality. Real ego is never born and never dies. Ego is always real, but due to the mind, it feels and acts as limited and false I. And that was from page 2994. And it's just a really interesting distinction because we often talk about the ego dying, but Baba actually says, no, it's the mind that has to die, the limited mind. The ego, there is a real ego. And so that's our individuality, which Baba says stays with us in God realization. And then I found a few more lovely quotes in Treasures from Meher Baba Journal. These are really short. And Baba says, the existence of almost all persons is under the control of the mind, but scarcely 1 out of 10,000 persons controls the mind and thus masters the very existence itself. Goes on to say, happiness and misery, virtue and vice, pleasure and pain, heaven and hell, birth and death are the creations of the mind and depend on the mind. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I mean, it is the most incomparable gift to be able to read what Baba says about the mind, which I really hadn't tuned into until I started searching for this and noticing how much it helps to take time out and inquire into our stressful thoughts and come closer to him. So thank you everyone for coming today. And
thanks.
yeah, everybody can just say whatever they want because here we are. And I don't know, I'll figure, by God's grace, I'll figure out what we're doing next week, but we're going to just keep going deeper into our inquiry until it really becomes second nature for us. So, Jai Baba, everyone.
Thank you.
Baba,
Thank you. Thank
You're
you, Anne.
welcome.
This
You're
was
so
wonderful.
welcome. It's really a gift to get to be with everyone who shows up. I feel for me it's just a really sweet gift from Baba, and I'm so grateful. Grateful that we can share in this together and come closer to him, closer and closer.
Thank you, Jai Baba.
Thank you. Thank you, Annie.
Hey, Baba.
Anna.
Jai Baba, Jai Baba.
Hey, Baba.
Take care.